All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Metal and Forge podcast. It is a weekly podcast discussing manhood, entrepreneurship, American life, and matters of the soul. Glad you're listening. If you are, and please go to mettleandforge.com where you can submit topic ideas or questions we can get into on the show. We love to involve people, right, Patrick? We'd love to get people involved with this somehow, and we can't have everyone on the show every week, of course. But we'd love to get people involved as much as possible. And going to Mettle and Forge, that's METTLE, mettleandforge.com, to submit topic ideas, questions, discussion ideas, that type of thing would be awesome. So go ahead and do that.
Or if you have an idea for a guest suggestion.
Yeah, that too. Absolutely. We'd like to have some guests on from time to time because that'd be fun. So any ideas on that front, we would welcome also. I'm Kent Lapp. I'm moderating tonight. Here we have Patrick Miller. Welcome, Patrick. How was your weekend? You ready for another week? How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty strong. It's been we had a wonderful weekend. Had some guests from out of town, and had a lovely time. Played tourists in our hometown.
There were tourists in your hometown?
We were tourists in our own hometown, taking them around.
Nice.
So it was good.
Fun. All right, let's jump right in. We've got first on the docket, top line thoughts on the election. You know, one of the things we're getting into here is American life, and you don't have to get very deep into American life before you realize there's what seems to be a pretty big election looming, and it seems to have sort of dominated the media for the last 2 years. I'm kind of looking forward to that not being the case. Hopefully we get a year or two off before it really ramps up again.
Yeah.
But it's on people's minds. Some people care about it quite a lot. Other people not quite as much. But I think a lot of people are paying attention.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get your kind of top line thoughts, Patrick, your summary, kind of what you're seeing. Tell us where you're at.
One of the things I'm seeing is, I would say, more engagement across the board. There's not a lot of people that I run into that are kind of opting to stand by this election. It seems like people are kind of engaged, and I don't sense a lot of cynicism actually, which is kind of interesting because it would be easy to be cynical about the political process. But I don't know. I mean, they're definitely engaged, passionate on both sides. I don't understand quite the Kamala campaign in terms of, how much of it is grassroots and how much of it is legitimate, real support. It's very strange the way that they shoehorned her in there without a primary. It's a very strange thing. It's hard to know, what the average Democrat voter really feels about that. But I think both sides are going to cry foul, if no matter who wins, there's probably going to be some claims of election fraud. It's probably going to be a little while before we know who's going to be the next president. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that. What's your take on, what are you seeing from your vantage point with the two candidates that we're down to now, Trump and Kamala, Patrick?
Well, I have, let me just start out by saying that I was wrong about Trump to a certain degree. I've changed on Trump, and I really can't believe I'm saying this. I was almost a never Trumper. I was really not a fan. Did you watch his Rogan episode just the other day?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So to be able to sit down and do that for 3 hours with Rogan, and the way that he was able to, it was a format that was good for his style of communicating, and I came away respecting him more than I expected to. And I don't think I have to hold my nose to vote for him as much as I thought I would have to, is kind of where I'm at right now. Kamala, I'm not as scared of Kamala as I might be of the average kind of left-leaning, progressive candidate. She seems pretty incompetent in some ways. In terms of an effective leader, I don't see signs of her being able, you know, when you think about people who can really execute on things. I mean, I think she has a lot of bad ideas, but, you know, I think the ideas that she puts forward are, you know, have been proven by history to be not great ideas in a lot of ways. And she scares me a little bit because she has that kind of an authoritarian bent. Like, she really enjoyed putting people in prison when she was a prosecutor. Like, she put people in prison for marijuana, and she had fun doing it, you know? And that's, you know, law and order, yeah, fine. But she's an authoritarian, and she's kind of, she's an authoritarian wine mom in some sense, and, you know, kind of a Karen type, and, you know, and it seems like a strange candidate to, you know, if you're going to shoehorn in someone, why her? I don't quite,
Yeah.
I don't profess to understand the machinations that make that the case.
Well, I think in some way, you know, it sort of had to be her with the way they'd sort of painted themselves in a corner, because, you know, if you were to bypass a woman and a woman of color in particular, now, if they had done a speed run primary, that probably would have been a little bit better. And then if she had won that,
yeah,
they could fall back on that at least.
More legitimacy.
It would give her more legitimacy. But yeah, I think they almost could not pass over her with the way they'd sort of painted themselves in a corner. But yeah, I heard Rogan say he was doing a fight commentary the day after the podcast with Rogan, and I was watching that, and he was talking with the three other guys just briefly about the Rogan interview. And he said, he just said this in passing, but to me, this was a huge flex. He said he didn't pee when he got here. He sat through 3 hours of podcasting and did not pee before he left.
That's hilarious.
I'm like, dude, I'm about 40 now, and I can tell you right now, I'm not able to do that. Now, it could be because he wasn't drinking anything, you know.
Yeah, but I might have been dehydrated.
You know, that's a pretty serious dad flex right there. If you can not pee and then talk for 3 hours and not pee before you leave, you know.
Yeah,
the young guys won't
strong.
understand that, but
yeah, exactly. It's the enlarged prostate. Oh my!
I thought
did you notice how much he talks about the weave that he does in his conversations? I never realized how much of that he does, and the way that he goes about it is actually, it's almost sophisticated in a strange kind of way. Like he can go really far afield and then bring it back, and it seems kind of stream of consciousness rambling, and I think he plays people with it. It can come off as kind of rambly or, you know, kind of stream of consciousness, but I think he knows where he's going with it. Like he's very, I think he uses that and he plays to that a bit. And it's pretty powerful as a communication tool, and it kind of makes him, I think it causes people to misjudge him.
I think it's a way to keep people's attention for a longer period of time. And the extreme example of that would be like, if we were just reading back and forth to each other right now, no one would want to listen. It would be unlistenable. It would be super boring. And so, like, the difference between reading and just speaking to someone, but then I think it's like that difference, but less. It going from like what we're doing right now to like what he would do and go out on his weaves. I think it keeps people's attention, because you're sort of like talking about like what's coming up in the conversation as you go.
Yeah.
And I do have to say, I do have to give him credit for this, because I'll tell you right now, I would forget where I was going on probably at least 30 to 40% of those weaves.
Yeah.
Maybe if I would practice it, but he really doesn't seem to forget where he's going on these weaves. And he talks about that. He says, I've heard him say multiple times, you know, if you don't have a sharp brain here, you're going to go out and you're going to go on a weave, and then you're going to be in the wilderness and not know where to go back to.
I laughed when he said that. That's hilarious, because that happens sometimes. It's like you get lost and you can't find your way back. But, you know, usually the host is the one who brings it back if it gets lost. You know, Rogan, I noticed Rogan was kind of chomping at the bit sometimes to get back. And Trump kind of played into that a little bit. It's like, well, it's like, I'm doing this weave. He kind of made it explicit, it's like, we'll get back there kind of.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
To your point on sort of mojo, vibe, how Kamala makes you feel, I am not opposed to the idea that Kamala won that debate that they had. I'm not necessarily.
I don't think anybody really thinks that.
See, that's my opinion too. I would not have said that she won. I was mostly staying off social media because, when you're on X and you're watching the debate, I can't do two things at once. So if I'm looking at X, I'm missing what's happening on the debate. So I pretty much just watched it through. I thought she was very passive aggressive. I thought she was sort of cynical. I thought the whole pulling her hand under her chin and looking at Trump and with these, it was a pretty big turnoff for me because it seemed like something a passive aggressive, negative, cynical mom might do.
Yeah.
It really wasn't coming off well at all. She seemed like she didn't have any coherent thoughts on things. She seemed most in her wheelhouse when she was opposing Trump and talking about abortion. But it just didn't seem to me like I would not have watched that debate and said she won that. So I was curious what your take was.
Yeah, I didn't watch enough of the debate to have an opinion about it. But in general, it's grating for me to hear her talk because of the aspects of her character that you talked about and the way she comes across. It's not easy to hear for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you my thoughts. I was thinking kind of primarily in terms of sort of the two candidates. And, I think with Trump, what you saw is what you're going to get, except this time he knows a system. So I do think he'll make better appointments. He's talked about that. So I do think
that's a key thing for me is in being able to come around to this is the people that he's surrounding himself with.
I totally agree. And
it's Elon, it's Vivek, it's RFK, it's Tulsi Gabbard. Who am I missing?
And JD Vance.
Vance. I mean, look at that. That to me, that makes me be able to go, I'm going to vote for Trump without really holding my nose about it.
Yeah, because you get, 1, 2, 3, JD Vance, RFK, Elon, Tulsi, Vivek. I mean, you kind of get 5 for the price of 1 there. I mean, that's a pretty stacked team.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, he knows the system better. And I think, can you dream a little bit about Elon doing in the federal government what he did at Twitter?
You can. Why not?
I mean, seriously?
It seems like too good to be true. It seems like, okay, that ain't going to happen. But
I mean, I guarantee you one thing. If anybody could do it, it's him.
You're right. You're right. And they're talking about it a lot. And it's not just like a politician putting some stuff out there. Like Elon is saying it. They're all talking about it. Trump is, of course. But if Trump gets elected and then just decides, you know what, we're not going to do anything on that government efficiency front after all, sorry, Elon, that's not going to go well for Trump.
Oh, no, it's not.
The party's not going to have it.
Yeah.
So if he actually gets in, I actually expect real work to be done on the Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah, exactly.
Which Elon is a pretty interesting pick. I think, go ahead.
If they were capable of reducing the federal government by 60, 80%, cut out the bureaucrats and let the economy go and let it run, we would enter an era of unprecedented growth in this country. It would be something to see.
I agree. Unprecedented growth, unprecedented prosperity. I think you would have the government sticking its fingers into far less things. So the money aside, I think our living, would go up. Our quality of life would 100%. Go up. I just don't think they're going to be able to cut 60, 80%. But if they can cut 20 to 30%, that's a good start.
One can dream.
One can dream. But yeah, I think with Trump, I think we're going to get more of what we saw. I think we'll see renewed diplomatic efforts at ending the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East.
Oh yeah, I agree.
I think we'll get a more secure border.
Yeah.
I think we'll get a better economy, including lower taxes, which is part of why the economy does better then. And and at least incremental change in laws connected to human health. This Maha movement, because here again, he's got Elon, who's a very well-known personality with a lot at stake, staking his reputation in a way on the Department of Government Efficiency. But he also has, on the other side, RFK Jr., who is equally, maybe not equally well-known, or maybe more well-known in some circles, very well-known, who also has a lot at stake, who has a reputation to withhold. And, say what you want about RFK, the guy really cares, and he's very smart, and he's deep into this stuff. And if they get in there and just do nothing with Maha, making America healthier again, that's not going to fly. So I think we're going to see actual change in some of the laws connected to human health.
I mean, challenge on that. Let me just, as a curiosity, like, what does it look like to try to get that through Congress, though? Right? These guys can be as passionate and bought in as possible, but what can you do if you've got, it's not a great crowd in the Congress.
No, it's not. And I don't know enough about who would be against some of those things or for or that type of thing to really know.
You've got the lobbyists in there, right? You got to deal. You got to slay that.
Yeah, you do. But the thing is the more public you can make it, the greater chance there's going to be change for the good, because these politicians, they want people to vote for them. They want to be popular, and they want money. So. And I think you can use the popular thing, if there's enough of movement kind of groundswell with the populace around some of these things, that applies pressure at the very least.
Can you dream, just talking about what we dream about, can you dream about RFK going after like seed oils and glyphosate and all that stuff? Changing our food supply. I know I'm asking for a lot, but you
are asking for a lot, and I don't know like what changes would be made, but if we could start to at the very least start to like attack some of these chemicals that are killing us, that are in food that we feed our kids, that would be a good place to start.
Exactly. Half the stuff on the ingredient list in most of the store-bought cereals.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So yeah, we already talked about increased government efficiency with Trump, and then the last two that I had was less government interference in media. I think we did see, and I think we will see less government interference in media under Trump, and safer cities. Yeah. And then, go ahead, and then I'll.
Well, the safer cities thing is part of the whole. Trump's like a law and order guy, right? Like he's all about law and order. And it's the opposite of the defund the police thing. It'll be interesting to see if he gets in, how that changes.
Yeah. Agreed. And the local DAs and the local politicians will politic their ass off and do what they can to not, but you can do things as the president, so I do think our cities would get safer. Even if it's a follow-on effect, like there's less illegal rapists and murders in the country. Yeah. Even if that were true, that will make our cities a little bit more safe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, with Kamala, I think what we're seeing is what we'll get. What we're currently seeing is what we'll get. I think it'll just be more of what has been.
We're not seeing a lot other than her campaign right now. It's like I don't remember her being all that effective as a vice president before she began campaigning for president.
No, she wasn't. And so, when you think about, well, what have we been getting? What do we expect to get going forward if we get more of the same with Kamala? I would say a mess at the border, illegal criminals running free in the country, checked out a real diplomacy on the world stage, an inability to negotiate an end to the wars, an inability to negotiate favorable international trade deals, increasingly dangerous cities, more government interference with the media, a less business-friendly environment, including increased regulation, less free speech, more abortions, and a fetish with racial and sexual identities at the detriment of merit, including at some of the highest levels of power in our government. More confused, uninspiring communication, continued and maybe even increased inflammatory rhetoric, and a fundamental inability to execute the office. What I really think is, to me, it's increasingly apparent that, or increasingly likely, I guess, to me, that Kamala is the worst presidential candidate of my lifetime. I mean, she seems to be a hollow vessel that's propped up by the media.
Yeah, I would agree.
I'll give you two reasons why I say that. One, I had a post on X about this, but one, if you had smart things to say, now would be a good time to say them.
Yeah.
If you don't, it must mean you don't have smart things to say.
Right.
I mean, come on. If you had policies that were compelling, inspiring, and looked to be effective and checked out, they passed the sniff test, you would be leading with that. If you go within 7 or 8 days of the election and never reveal any of these awesome, well-kept secrets in terms of your ideas and policies, it can only mean one thing, which is you do not have those ideas and policies. If you had smart things to say, now would be the time to say them. And if you don't, you must not have smart things to say. And the second is, whatever the question, the answer is Trump. And to me, this means that opposing Trump is the most compelling aspect of her campaign. Because if it was not the most compelling aspect of their campaign, if the most compelling aspect of their campaign was well-informed, inspiring, compelling plans, then you would lead with that, because your plan or your policy would be more compelling than talking about Trump. So you would be wasting time talking about Trump if you had plans and policies that were more compelling. However, if you're just always talking about Trump, that means opposing Trump is the most compelling thing you have going for you in your campaign.
Yeah.
The problem with that is it's lose-lose. If you lose, it was probably because you didn't say anything meaningful except for your words opposing Trump. And two, if you win, you're not ready for the office, because if you had these plans and policies that you were leading with, then you would fall back on those as a foundational model for your term as president.
Okay,
but if you don't have them, then see, opposing Trump is of no value if you become elected president.
100%, but Kent, she doesn't really need that, because nothing's really going to change in the background of who's actually operating the levers of power when the figurehead moves from Biden to Harris, if that's what happens. Nothing in the background will change. Whoever is pulling the strings that shoehorned her in here at the last minute without a primary and, made her the next candidate to be, to make that happen, somebody's pulling that, and making those, kind of greasing those rails, if you will. And so, and we know that Biden's not doing anything now, anything of any real merit. So whatever's happening is happening without the figureheads, having their hand on most of those levers. So if that changes to Harris, I don't think much changes. And your list is spot on. 100, and that's the way things are under, but that she'll just take them further that direction.
I totally agree. And I think what you're speaking to is the fact that I think with a Trump presidency, you're going to get Trump leading things. With a Kamala presidency, you're probably going to get the underbelly of the Democratic Party leading things.
Yeah. Probably much of the same apparatus is leading things now.
Exactly, because it's not Biden.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so I totally agree with your assessment on that. The last thing I would say has to do with rhetoric. And, a year and a half ago, I would not have said this because I didn't know. But I've started, just been paying attention a little bit more and stuff. I've come to the conclusion that you cannot both sides the rhetoric in politics in this country, and everyone does. We got to tone the rhetoric down. Democrats are doing it. Republicans are doing it. The thing is, Patrick, they're not both doing it the same way and with the same force and through the same communication mediums. That you cannot both sides the rhetoric anymore. I mean, listen, I will give you that Trump calls Kamala dumb, a liar, incompetent, kind of a fraud in some ways, I guess, which you would be if you were all those things and you were trying to be president of the United States. But the lying thing is obvious, right? They all lie. They're all politicians. So he's right about that. Maybe everyone is, but that doesn't make him wrong about saying Kamala's a liar.
Right.
You know, dumb, maybe there's a better way to say it, but he's just putting more blunt words to what we've been saying here. I mean, if you had smart things to say, you'd be saying them. And so, so that's what you hear from the right about the left. But what you hear from the left, the Democratic Party, Kamala, Biden, the Obamas, Governor Newsom, Chuck Schumer, Pelosi, he's a fascist, he's Hitler, he's a threat to democracy, our democracy will not stand, he is going to attack people from within, he's going to put people based on their racial profile in jail, he's going to jail LGBTQ, he's going to not let go of his hold on the public office, not let go of the presidency. This would be the last president we ever have. I mean, this stuff is insane, Patrick.
Right.
It's insane.
Right. It's crazy.
And you cannot both sides this. The right is not saying these things about the left.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Trump is the kind of guy that I was initially concerned might have tendencies towards some, tyrannical overreach. Like, I was genuinely concerned at that. But then when I saw who he surrounded himself with this time around, I was like, if you're actually a tyrant, you wouldn't surround yourself with some of the most competent, and powerful truth tellers. To me, that's kind of what did it for me. It's like, well, you know what? He might have some narcissistic tendencies. I mean, the process kind of eliminates everyone else, right? So, but I don't think he's a tyrant. I don't, and so you're right. I mean, what kind of critiques of Kamala do you hear?
Yeah, just those that I mentioned, from people on the right. The country's going to go to shit.
Yeah.
She's not going to be able to do a good job. She's not ready for the office. She's in over her head. She's not smart. She can't communicate properly. Like, the attacks tend to be more on her ability to execute the office.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more merit-based stuff. And then I've just sort of, what I have started to assume is from the Democratic Party, every accusation is an admission. And when you think about what they're saying and assume that every accusation is actually an admission, it actually just sort of starts to explain a lot. Yep. And then you can just sort of smile, let it, let it brush off your shoulders and move on. And that does seem to make the most sense. And I'll give you another one. The idea that Trump is going to jail his political opponents. You would think that if you're the party trying to jail your political opponents, you would at least not talk about it.
Right.
You would at least not put the idea in people's minds that, Trump is going to jail his political opponents when you're the party trying to jail your political opponents.
Yep.
And so it's, again, every accusation is an admission, and then things start to make a lot more sense about the Democratic Party.
100%.
Including that one, which is just such a blatant, in-your-face, conjectured lie that comes from I don't know where. I mean, he would have had the opportunity with Hillary and didn't. And didn't. And, he's talked about giving Hunter Biden a pardon if he gets elected. that's just yet another example of the rhetoric, coming from the left. I just think it's way more amped up. Now, I'm not talking about the rhetoric of the people in those parties, because that I have no idea who's better or worse on that. I'm talking about the rhetoric from the people in positions of influence within the parties themselves.
Yeah.
And it is far worse coming from the left than it is from the right.
Yeah, I agree. I see the same thing. The left has, so if you step back, like zoom out one step and think about Kamala as a candidate, in this kind of cultural moment, you've got you're kind of post-Christian, right? We're not as Christian of a culture as we used to be. And a lot of that, seeking after God or kind of meaning making and trying to find God in some, because we all have that innate yearning. Like we look for a God, we make a God, we're worshipers. And, if you're no longer worshiping the Christian God, one of the things that presents itself as a suitable alternative is the state, the government apparatus, and, worshiping that as a small g God. And I think the left is more godless than the right, and so probably more prone to worshiping the state. And so if you think about a cultural figurehead that would sit at the top of the hierarchy of the small g God of the state when it's being worshipped, it's like, what should that figurehead look like? Well, it's a minority black woman, that's obsessed about gender. It's like, well, because that's the highest thing, and so
it's at least the flavor of the day.
Right. And it's in this culture, in this moment, that's what's being lifted up as being kind of the, and so of course that's what represents the figurehead at the top of the small g God of the state.
That makes sense. So. Either way, though, I think we'll make it. I don't subscribe to the idea that if Kamala becomes president, we've lost our country. I don't agree with that.
No.
I think it's going to have less to do with the country surviving and more to do with the trajectory that we set ourselves on.
Yeah. I think really good things are going to happen, actually. I do. Things don't look so good right now, but I do think that there's, we're on the verge of, I guess it could go both ways, right? I mean, it could collapse into chaos and hell, but it could get radically better too, and probably sooner than you think. Obviously I was dreaming optimistically about what I would ask for in, hypothetical future administration, but I'm talking beyond that, and in, the realm of consciousness, even the elevation of human consciousness. I think there's some stuff shaking and moving that, I just think that some of this stuff is going to kind of, we may go through a tumultuous time yet. I'm not saying we shouldn't be prepared for that, but I do have optimism long term.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we would look back on, say, the last decade as sort of the low point in American history? And then we would sort of, go up from there, and then whatever happens 50, 60, 70 years from now happens, but at least we would sort of, this would have been the low point, and then we get back on a good trajectory. That is possible. Let's do this, Patrick. Let's steelman for a second the case of some reasonable, smart, well-meaning person in America that really thinks Kamala is the better choice here. What might they be seeing that would cause them to think, or maybe even say, like, I really think Kamala is the better choice here?
Okay, so I have a friend who is a genuine Kamala supporter. So it's easy for me to steelman that in some sense, because I can just kind of describe his position as I see it. But he values, he values, I think, looking out for the underdog. He's is kind of oriented that way, and he's also part of the kind of post-Christian atheist. So he doesn't, he's not a Christian, and he gets a lot of, I think, positive sense of identity from belonging to a culture that cares about the values that the progressive left puts forward. And that being part of that value set is, life-giving to him, I would say. And he, like, his life is flourishing. I'm not, so he has reasons to hold the ideas that he does. I don't agree with them, but I see how he's built a good life, and a part of that good life is a adherence to a set of values that are partly enumerated in, maybe in the kind of progressive left's Bill of Rights. I don't necessarily hold the same values, but I still appreciate him as a person and can I understand how he gets there. Now, I've got serious concerns about the downstream effects of, the Bolsheviks at the gate, to reference the Soviet Revolution. But, and that could lead us into a whole conversation about communism and everything else. But I think that Kamala is kind of, she's Marxist, but Marxist light. Like I don't think she's, and I'm not saying I am, but I don't think she's intellectually serious enough to be a serious Marxist.
Interesting.
Because reading Marx, it's kind of dense. And so I don't know. I guess her affinity for Marxist ideas to me, seems something more as part of the culture at large kind of thing. That's what's popular to say. And she doesn't seem... She's got more of a, I don't know, kind of like the attributes we talked about earlier. So, but she still spouts off these kind of, neo-Marxist ideas.
Yep.
But it's hard to take her super seriously about it. So.
Yep. So you might have a supporter for Kamala might be someone who is, just bought in on the progressive ideals of the left. And then, two, you might have someone who's just blue no matter who. They're going to vote blue no matter who. And the only thing I would say to them is, I get it, but it might be good to start thinking about where your boundaries are. Yeah. Because, just think about the person who would come in that is blue that you would not vote for. What does that person stand for? What does that person look like? You may as well start thinking about it, because I'm not saying, Kamala is that one that should cause you to not vote blue no matter who, but that's not the best. Well, there's no thought that needs to go into that, and it's good to put thought into things. And then the third one is the never Trumpers. You'll have never Trumpers that are voting for Kamala, because if they vote for anyone else, they're throwing their vote away, and they don't want to quite do that, but they just can't vote for Trump. And there's plenty of those people around. Now, let's steel man this, Patrick. All right, let's say you've historically been a conservative, and you are a Christian. You do not necessarily adhere to the progressive policies of the left at the level of principle, but in this election, you're voting Kamala. What would cause someone to arrive at that conclusion, do you think? A conservative Christian who is not, this goes with conservative, but not historically bought in with the left.
But would vote Kamala.
But would vote Kamala this time. What do you think the reasoning is there?
Do you think that would be an anti-Trump vote because of Trump's belligerence and kind of character issues and all of that? Is that kind of a sanctimonious? Is that the kind of sanctimony vote?
Maybe. But what do you think would cause him to go Kamala over Trump this time? Do you think it's the lawsuits he's had brought against him? Do you think it's his just his kind of free talking, talks like a regular person, says some dumb shit sometimes? Do you think it's how he handles himself? I'm just kind of curious what you think these people would consider such a deal breaker.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably the things you mentioned in terms of his crudeness, maybe. I mean, look, he's definitely, he's not as crude and not as poor a character as the left makes him out to be. But he's got the warts of you wouldn't arrive at the situation he's at in life without, having some character, some shadows to your character, let's say. I mean, to do what he did in New York City, and it is, he navigated some tricky territory already, and so like him or not, he's got that going for him. And so, but you've got to be kind of a son of a bitch to do that too,
Yeah.
And
You're right.
It's like the position almost precludes everything else. In some sense.
Racist. But look, I think some people still think he's racist.
I don't read him as racist.
Of course not. His wife can barely speak English.
However, I do think he inflames people's xenophobic tendencies.
Okay.
In order to accrue political power to himself. And that's not great.
Okay. Interesting. I guess I hadn't noticed that.
I don't think he does that consciously. It may be a subconscious thing.
Okay.
But, okay, so this is kind of, we were talking about how they compared him to Hitler earlier, and I'm not comparing him to Hitler at all. But there's this thing that Hitler did that was, he triggered people's disgust sensitivity. And disgust sensitivity is like at a trait level in your personality. We all have a potential for we're disgusted by certain things, but some people are much more disgust sensitive than others. And Hitler's obsession about the filth of the Jews triggered people's innate disgust sensitivity and was part of what activated within them something that enabled what happened as the final solution presented itself to Hitler, and he killed millions of Jews. It's like, how do you turn people into that? Well, you trigger their disgust sensitivity. You trigger something that's innate in them, that's so deep in them that they don't even know it's being activated. But the speeches he gave over time were adapted to the rising disgust sensitivity that he activated in the culture. And that is what gave rise to the expulsion of the Jews from their community. It was like a disease, and the body politic treated it as such to the most, terrible final end. And anytime that a politician uses language that triggers disgust sensitivity about another group of people, that always has the potential to go sideways because of that tendency. And while I think we have a terrible problem at the border, and it's a travesty, and it's insane, and it's unthinkable that we would allow that, and that we allow that kind of human suffering. I mean, we could do a whole episode about thoughts on the border, but crazy. But the language that borders on triggering disgust sensitivity when talking about people who are coming into the country, you might start a process that you're not in control of entirely.
I see. Okay.
In the culture, in people's kind of innate response to.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. If that's sort of what people have in mind.
I mean, what do you think about that?
Then, well, I think what you said is something that was not on my radar that I hadn't had knowledge of. I guess I just haven't heard him triggering people's disgust sensitivities about people from other countries or different backgrounds or other colors, except for the people that are here illegally.
Right. And I'm not defending like I said, the illegal thing that needs to be solved like ASAP. And I think Trump would be, great to solve it. But to call everybody that is illegal who comes in to kind of use language that really activates that innate disgust sensitivity, which I've heard him do, is like, I would keep an eye on that. That's not great.
That's interesting.
So,
yeah. Yep.
Maybe. He's not a perfect candidate for sure. Far from it.
Sure.
I'm barely across the line of voting for him, but
okay.
I do think it is important that he wins this election. I will say that. So
yeah. Agreed. All right, let's move on to America's future. So we have some pretty great founding principles in this country. We've had a really good run. Uh, those principles are being diminished in value and in practice. We are in decline. I think
Now,
you can look at.
can I just jump in and ask a clarify? You said they're being diminished in value. In our perception of their value? What do you...
Yes. They're being diminished in our perception of their value.
Okay,
Their value is
understood.
being diminished in our minds.
They're
And
perhaps still valuable, but we're moving away from them. Is that what you're
absolutely
saying?
correct.
Okay.
That's exactly what I have in mind here. And
Got
so
it.
you see a headline in the last several weeks about something like, what did it say? Something about like, should we revisit the Constitution? Or, I mean, it was just straight up like going after the founding document here and
Yeah.
casting doubt on it. But that's just one example. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of these, values that are under attack, you could say. And we do seem to be in decline. And the question is, where does it go from here? Like, are we not in as much of a decline as it sometimes seems? Is the decline actually far worse than it might seem? And we're sort of not actually seeing it because we're distracted by all the bright lights in the different directions. And where does it go from here? I'm curious what you think.
Well, I know that I've become more sensitive to the scale of human suffering that is, I would say, increasingly becoming the average American lifestyle. I think there's a lot that is in our culture that is part of our life that we have no idea how dysregulating and unhealthy it is. I think we are a very sick culture in many ways. I think we're also the best thing that's ever happened, in terms of the kind of political experiment and capitalism and all of that. None of that. But where we are today as a culture, there's a lot of really unhealthy patterns and unhealthy people and unhealthy relationships. Now, I'm not I said earlier, I'm an optimist, but I do see, and maybe I'm optimistic because I see that what we have now cannot sustain. Like it has to be transformed in some pretty profound way, or else it goes to pot completely.
Mm-hmm.
It feels unsustainable what we're doing now. The level of dysregulation, the level of ill health, the level of disconnect from speaking the truth, the media twisting things and presenting a narrative and people blindly buying into that, and for unelected groups to be operating the levers of power in our country and exercising power over us, power to us, power on over us that we don't have any ability to answer at the polls. We don't have any ability to do anything about it. There's a lot wrong. Like there's a lot that has to change. But I'm optimistic. I think there's a lot of potential for change too. I mean, more than any place that I'm aware of, we have this sense of possibility, and I don't think we've lost that.
Yeah.
I think maybe hard times, and in some sense, it's hard times now for a lot of people. Because when you asked, is there an ascendance or is there a descendance? And, it's like, and I think it's both things happen at the same time for different groups of people, and there's a high level of mobility, in America. And I think that's one of the things that sets America apart is that we're economically mobile because of the possibility that we have, the sense of possibility that we have. And interestingly enough, Wall Street Journal just did an article about the economic mobility of Holmes County, Ohio, where I was born and where I live today. And it turns out it's one of the most upwardly economically mobile counties in the country. And they talked about how, many in, Gen X or Gen Y, people are now, earning much greater salaries than their parents are earning. And they evidenced, they did some some interviews with local business owners and highlighted some different things that were happening here. But I thought it was interesting. So America's got all that going for it, right? There's more possibility. There's a sense, anything can be built and can be done, even while there's this heavy-handed regulatory burden that is this unelected layer sitting over top of us. It's still, there's something about America that people still flood through they flood in here illegally and legally. It's still a place people want to come to when the chips are down. And I think if we play that right, we could be unbelievably prosperous and powerful and good. But where we are today is we need to be healthy again in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I totally agree that if we play it right, we do have an opportunity here. The clay is wet in a lot of the world right now. There's a lot shifting, and it really is a time of opportunity. I don't know how optimistic I am that we're going to capitalize on this opportunity that's before us and use it to leverage ourselves into a better position.
I mean, some will and some won't, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
you're right.
As a culture, will we? That's
hard
to say.
But even things like, I heard some insane stat the other day, like, I think we're up to like 30 or 40% of the GDP is from the U.S. government.
Yeah.
I actually think I heard it was closer to half, but that sounds impossible to me. That sounds insane. I mean, if it's 100%, then it's communism, right? When 100% of the GDP somehow falls under the U.S. government. So if it's not 100% right now, but 40% sounds way too high. I mean, good grief. And some staggering statistic about the amount of total employment that actually tracks up to the federal government through contractors, through employers, through whatever the source, but tracks back up to the government. It was insanely high. The All In guys were talking about this recently.
Yeah.
I should have wrote the stats down.
Well, I just looked it up, and it says, Google's AI, which that's, find that, difficult to trust, but it says that the government spending as a percentage of GDP was 24% in 2023, 22.7% in 2023.
But just,
that's
where...
I mean, the amount is 6.1 trillion. That's
a
trillion. Yeah, can't.
Yeah, I don't even know how to do that math. That's insane.
Yeah.
But, the amount of our economy that's directly attributed to the U.S. government or reports up to the U.S. government one way or another, what's happening with our dollar, what's happening with how we're positioning ourselves in the world stage, what's happening within our country. I mean, you see some of these cities, they look like war zones.
Yeah. Some
of these airports in the Northeast look like they're from a different generation because they were from a different generation and they were never updated. They feel like prisons when you're inside of them. The amount of American people that are struggling, the amount of speech that's getting regulated and captured, the amount of freedom that's being taken, the amount of propaganda that's being put forward on everyone, the amount of essentially mind control. You call it whatever you want. You call it mind control, psyop, information campaigns. You call it what you want, but it's all the same thing. And then you have sort of the people in power that are abusing their power to take advantage of the situation, and then partying, and then life is good, and then doing silly stuff with like the LGBTQ front and like glorifying that and sort of rubbing that in your face a little bit as a people. Like, it's sort of, sometimes it feels like we're in the Hunger Games.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's the taking of the sacred and turning it into the profane or turning it into mockery that is so symbolic of that kind of attitude that you talked about. It's right out front in the culture today.
Yes. And so if that continues for another 50 years at the same growth rate that it has, I just don't, I don't think you wind up with a country that's really too similar to what we're at now, which really is dissimilar in some pretty significant ways from what it was 100 years ago. That trajectory to me just doesn't seem good. Now, do I really think that's going to happen? And do I really think there's a ton I can do about it right now? And do I really think it's worth losing sleep over? I guess not really. So that's why I wonder if I'm speaking out both sides of my mouth,
Well,
because
you think about this aspect of it is people, I think we barely know what it means to flourish anymore. I think we've become so disenchanted with life that we don't know what it would mean to really flourish. And because you can see it in the symbols that we hold up as the symbols of value and attainment in our culture in a lot of ways. If you look at the newest kind of nouveau riche kind of developments in Nashville and other areas, there's kind of a boring blandness that settles in, that it's extravagant and it's nice and it signals the right things to people. And it's a sign of local, success economically for sure. But there's not true beauty. Like there's nothing that takes your breath away. There's a boring blandness, and for a young professional coming out of college, the symbol of success for them is, renting a luxury apartment in a place like Maryland Farms, Brentwood, Tennessee, that, there's a core power yoga in the studio and there's a Chick-fil-A across the parking lot. And it's exactly the same as 75 other cities in this country. And, the apartment is the same as tens of thousands of others. And their version of life is, the most adventurous thing that they do is probably, ride their mountain bike on a paved trail, twice a month. And they go to the farmer's market and they live, lives that it's hard. There's not something that's pulling them into beauty and awe and, and I'm not, that I'm not against the mundane. Like I think the kingdom of heaven is found in the mundane. So none of that is a critique on the mundane, but there's a lack of beauty. There's a sameness. There's a blandness to even the symbols of our ascension as a culture. Even the symbols that are supposed to signal luxury and, can really, and that's why they're meaningless ultimately in this kind of Hunger Games scenario. But you do see this kind of lack of real art and real beauty in that kind of strata of the economic, so it's like, that's where people are going when they do succeed. It's like, the peak of life is having a Whole Foods and a Chick-fil-A, within 10 minutes, right? And it's like, I've achieved this kind of, but, you drive the same SUV that everybody else, drives, and you're going to the same places to signal your kind of arrivement in this stratosphere. There's kind of a meaninglessness to it. And I think, people are starting to reckon with that at some level. And it'll be interesting to see where it all goes, because some places are expanding like crazy, but all with this kind of boring sameness that I talked about, the same kinds of brands, the same kinds of places, same experiences, the same, I think particularly men are built for adventure, and we're built for novel adventure. And, if we're going to reanimate the soul of man, it's not going to be through, another kind of luxury apartment and a Tesla, plugged in outside.
Yeah, you're right. Well, yeah. And this idea that we've sort of become unfamiliar with a truly flourishing society is, or maybe in some ways we've forgotten how to flourish. It is interesting. I wonder if you might be a little bit right on that.
So you see homesteaders starting to happen, right? There's this movement online for people homesteading, and probably not much of it qualifies for true homesteading, but no, it's still the effort that counts, I think. And don't you think it's driven by a desire to have more meaning in their life and more adventure in their life than what this kind of corporate, kind of luxo sameness that I was describing earlier offers them?
Yeah, it could be. It could be the adventure. I think, and sometimes it's like going back, to a point in history a little bit that they would have maybe feel like they would have resonated more with had they been born at that period of time. It could be that partly, and it's probably both. But no, I think you raise a good point. It could very actually, I think with the ones I know, that sense of adventure it's tied in.
Yeah.
It's actually tied in with kind of all of them that I could think about.
Yeah. It is.
So
for us.
that is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you consider that kind of what you've done? Would you consider your move a little bit of in the same category of like some of these homesteaders?
We're not homesteading per se, but moving out onto some land, being in the middle of 26 acres and trying to tame it and cut lumber and clear out the woods and develop it and build it out. And we'll get to the cows. I would say we're long-term homesteaders probably. I'd like to run some beef in the pasture next year. Like to have some goats and some sheep probably. Turns out raising sheep is a good way to get great meat at a low cost. They propagate like crazy.
Really?
Yeah, and you just run them out in the meadow. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. My grandfather, my mom's dad had always had sheep. Kind of cool little animals, but they were dirty a lot. And
so I don't know if we qualify as homesteaders yet, but I think we might head there at some point.
Okay,
but it is part of that adventure story,
Sure. I just hadn't been putting what you were doing in the homesteading category, but I guess it depends how you look at it.
No,
all right,
we're not homesteaders, but I'm sympathetic to it, and I have some aspirations.
No, I do too. I mean, I grew up from 15 acres, and I think about it. I think about what that would be like again one day. And we've talked about it with the family, but everyone kind of likes it here right now in our little 1 acre. In the city.
You've got it set up nice.
Yeah, they've set up good. The kids have friends, and we love it here. So, all right, Miller, anything else you want to talk about on this status of America and where we're heading? Or shall we move on?
No, I think I think there's a somewhat optimistic answer there, but there's a lot of risks that you all lined up really nice. But
what I think to myself sometimes is it actually far worse than I think it might be, or is it actually better than I think it might be? And honestly, I vacillate between the two. It depends on the information that's kind of in front of me. Or what really is like if you get like a 3-4 bits of information over the course of a couple weeks, like 3-4 bits of information that are really not good, and in your worldview actually quite bad, and then they stack in the course of a few weeks, then I get to feeling like, man, this is actually maybe far worse than I might think. And then over time you realize, well, that kind of took care of itself. Okay, that kind of took,
Right.
The passage of time kind of smooths things out a little bit too. So I'm actually not sure if I could, mark something down to be looked at 100 years from now, I would probably have to say it's a little worse than we might think. That's probably what I would have to say. I don't want to say that. I just think it probably is a little worse than we might think. But no one's past redemption, right? And we're certainly not past redemption as a country.
Right. And I know one thing 100% certainly that will improve the situation that I can do about it. And that is I can make me the best kind of person that I was created to be. And I can take responsibility for me and my life and the people around me. And that's what makes the country better. Fundamentally, the country doesn't change when the president changes. The country changes when the people change. And you and I can take responsibility for that. And I think that's one of the things we want to be about at Metal and Forge is being the kind of men that are always forging forward, being better versions of ourselves, being able to show up in more love and more presence for our families and our communities, and, really letting the gifts and talents that we have come forward in a way that's good for the people around us, right? And, I think that's the one thing that we can all do to make this country this culture a better place, is take responsibility for ourselves and, make it everything that you can make it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, that's the takeaway, because otherwise you're just going to drive yourself nuts. Hey, before we wrap this up, so yeah, I think we might have made it all the way to the end here without acknowledging the fact that our buddy Austin Lapp could not make the podcast tonight. So you and I just forged ahead without him because we have metal.
That's right.
But we're down a man. So Austin, missed you. How are things going at Good King, Patrick?
It's been fun. I've got a couple guys joining here, and it's been fun to work with the guys through some of the challenges and some of the goals, developing some of the visions. One of the guys that I hosted here over the weekend was an alumni of the Good King, so we got to talk about some of those experiences. It was pretty cool.
Are you still heavy in building out content, building out the website, building out some of the structure pieces, or is that sort of gaining momentum?
Building out the coaching program right now. We've got the initial piece done, working on the next modules, and then working with the guys one-on-one, as well as in a group setting. We're going through a vision, developing our vision, so honing in on the values that we were created with and capturing a vision for our life that can guide us. And this is one of the cool things, actually. One of the guys was mentioning how they had developed a vision when we started working together. They developed a vision for their life, and we go through this exercise to kind of capture this vision of what it could be like if things went, if your life unfolded according to love in the best way that you could imagine. What would it be like, when you turn 50, or pick a point in the future, and then from that develop a vision for your life. And that changes as you move towards that. It's kind of, we discovered as we were talking, it's like there is always this kind of tacking back and forth like a sailboat, where it takes you in a certain direction and you learn the things that you were meant to learn. But then your vision becomes more clear, and it refines more, and you notice that it's actually this thing that's, and you might tack this way a little bit, and you take on some new skills and habits and mindsets and beliefs, and you practice new disciplines, and you tack this way, and you move towards that. You build new relationships, and you make new initiatives in business or creativity or whatever it is you're doing. You're tacking this way, but you always have that vision, but it's always, open for updating as you learn things and as you become more of who you were created to be. So it's been fun to notice that.
Yeah. That analogy of the sailboat tacking back and forth, that's really strong, actually. That's super strong. I love that. All right, everybody. Well, this is episode 4 of Metal and Forge. We are on all podcast channels, at least all the ones that pull from Spotify, which I think is all of them. We are also on YouTube, so you can check our YouTube channel out there. The episodes are dropping there. We have 1 subscriber and 3 views, so go get in on all the action on YouTube.
That's right. Let's go.
Miller, what do you want to plug before we wrap this up?
Check out goodking.life, my website, or goodking.life, my Instagram. I'd love to connect with you.
And that'll do it. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, Kent.